I just think that we've reached a time that kind of mirrors what we experienced back with the lawsuit era guitars that kind of had Fender with their backs to the walls, because all of the Japanese guitar makers back then were just spanking them as far as the quality and attention to detail that they were doing on the guitars that they were producing. This really has a lot of what I want in a good Jaguar. Just the neck alone, I think, is worth buying into, because it just feels heavenly. The fact that we started off with this almost impossible action just tells you the sheer care that goes into the crafting, especially the fretwork on these, to the point where I really do feel like it rivals some of more recent Fender Japan's offerings, which is crazy for a guitar that is $625 or less. It's just unheard of. Hey folks, Eddie from Totally Wired Guitars here, and I am super excited for today's episode because finally, after waiting for quite some time, today we are going to be taking a look at the FOALS FJG7. That is their Jaguar. Now, before we do anything else, I do want to thank the kind folks over at FOALS for sending this FJG7 to me for review. I do get to keep the guitar, so I want to be honest about that right up front, but with all of the other reviews on my channel, I'm always going to be 100% candid and transparent with you with everything and anything that I experience with this guitar. And in fact, I hope you can take my word for it, because I haven't even unboxed this thing, so we are going to be seeing it for the first time together. And as with all deep dive episodes, this thing is going to be hitting the bench as well as being plugged into the old Princeton Reverb Reissue so that we can hear what it sounds like. And in the end, I'm going to let you know whether I think the FJG7 is worth getting. All right, so without further ado, let's go ahead and unbox this thing. All right, so we've got that thing out already. This is looking like a bit of a different experience from what we had last time. In fact, they may have sent this to me in a different case altogether. Now, again, I do not know whether this is the standard FOALS gig bag now. It feels pretty high quality here, which is awesome, but different. It doesn't have all of the logos and stuff here, and it seems to be made of some kind of waterproof material or something. All right, so we've got our tremolo arm as well as all of our Allen keys that we're going to need. We can already see from the tremolo arm here that it is going to be a pop-in style arm and not a screw-in type. So that is nice. I am very, very excited to see what we've got going on in here. And once again, we've got that same nice padded gig bag. It's got the neck rest inside of here, and just a quality affair, especially for a stock gig bag on a, you know, $600 or less guitar. And then, oh my goodness, here it is. And actually, shockingly, for a Jag, I can already tell that this is a pretty decent weight for a Jaguar. Very, very nice. And what do we have? Oh my goodness, folks. There it is, and wow. Yes! I am so stoked on this because I've always wanted for myself a black on black Jaguar with a matching headstock, and this is freaking awesome. All right, so first, let's go ahead, remove. So as you can see, these strings are protected here. We've got that certificate of authenticity right there. We've got our little hang tag here. And then let's go ahead and pull off this nice little touch, you know? This is not really something that you ever see on Fenders and Squiers. So I really appreciate that attention to detail and care that they're putting into the product here, down to the fact that they're wrapping up the strings. Oh yeah, that is sick. And look, my friends, at how dark and rich that rosewood fretboard is. My goodness, for almost a negligible amount more than a Squier, you are getting that. The pre-2018 style rosewood. It's got that gloss. We'll touch more on that later on. But yeah, this is nice. This is nice. Let's go ahead, pop in that vibrato arm here. And yeah, this neck just feels, it feels really, really nice, smooth, and not too glossy. So that is awesome to see. And this is, unlike the FJM7 Ultra version of the black, this does not have a sparkle, unfortunately. I was hoping that this would have a bit of sparkle, but it doesn't, and that's totally okay. I'm actually getting a bit ahead of myself here, and I wanted to, before we do anything else, cover the specs for the FJG7. So the FJG7 features a lightweight North American alder body, which I definitely can confirm. If I were to guess, this is probably right around 8 pounds even, right? Maybe a hair over, but definitely not in that 9-pound range that a lot of Fender and Squier Jaguars can tend to be. We've also got here a Canadian hard maple neck. Both are finished in a thin polyurethane, and they made sure to specify on the spec sheet that this is a thin finish. The finish on the neck here, much like the FJM7 Ultra, is a kind of semi-gloss, semi-satin finished neck. It is not completely matte finish, which I dig, and definitely with some playing that is going to get more glossy over time. It feels very similar if you have played an American Pro or an American Pro Classic, Jazzmaster or Jaguar. It is a very similar finish to that. Now, the fretboard is an Indian rosewood fretboard, and a dark one at that. You really see not very much grain, but again, like I mentioned from the top, you can see that gloss. It is not the overly dry kind of rosewood that Fender has been shipping with their Ventera 3 and Ventera 2 Jaguars and Jazzmasters. Right? This also has a 9.5-inch radius, as well as 2.5mm nickel silver frets. I'd say that if I were to draw an equivalent to that, I'd say it's a slightly narrower medium jumbo, not as tall as a narrow tall fret, and definitely low profile. So somewhere kind of between a vintage tall and a medium jumbo. Very, very comfortable frets, because I don't like big frets personally on my offsets. Now, being a Jaguar, this is a 24-inch scale neck, and very, very nice touch. We've also got a bone nut that looks to be cut fairly well. I'm not really feeling sharp edge here as I play. Again, unlike Fenders or Squiers, especially around this price point. Now, one other thing that is very nice to see here is the fact that this does have mother of pearl, pearloid style inlays. Okay. Now, hardware wise, we have got the F3 brass saddle bridge. This is a fixed style bridge, kind of like a hybrid between a Mastery and a Hallen bridge. This one here, the F3 bridge, is not compensated saddles, unlike their new F4 bridge, which is also very, very nice. But again, on the FJM7 Ultra that also came with this bridge, I didn't have any issues with intonation, especially with the stock strings. Continuing with the hardware, we've also got FOALS F2 vibrato or tremolo system. It does come with the tremlock, and this has a very Mastery inspired kind of pop in collet here, which you can tighten or loosen to taste if you pull off the vibrato unit. I just find these to be really, really responsive, especially if you actually bend this arm up just a little bit. Now, moving on to the electronics, we have got the FJG62 Alnico Jaguar pickups here. And I do not know what kind of magnets or anything these have. I know that they specified that they were using copper wire, high quality German copper wire in their FJM7 Ultra. So I would expect that that's going to be the same here. As far as our actual wiring goes here, this is a traditional Jag style setup with your lead, volume, and tone controls. Down here, your independent pickup switches, as well as your strangle switch. And then we've got a vintage style rhythm circuit, which is basically just darker sound on your neck pickup only, with independent volume and tone controls up here when that rhythm circuit is engaged. Nothing down here is in the signal. So two separate circuits, just like a Fender Jaguar. This is also fully copper foil shielded, so I'm expecting that the standby noise here is to a bare minimum, especially because the claws on a Jag also help with that a bit. And that is, again, really, really nice to see, especially for a guitar that's between $600 and $625. Not even Fender's $1,300 to $1,500 offerings come with body shielding that actually makes any damn difference. Because again, the shielding paint that they just reintroduced to their Ventera 3 lineup makes absolutely zero difference. It is just smoke and mirrors, essentially. No continuity at all when checking with a multimeter, not to itself, nor even the circuit, the pots, the input jack itself. So yeah, that is another very, very nice detail here. And another thing that FOALS carries over from the JM7 Ultra is the fact that this does have vintage style locking tuners. Okay. All right. So let's go ahead and tune up and just give you my first impressions on the overall feel of this thing, even before we plug it in. And yeah, it feels really good out of the box. I can notice a couple of things that I am definitely going to be adjusting right away here, but the action on the bass strings here, I'm not getting any buzzing whatsoever here on the bass strings. I can tell that these strings, the treble strings down here, even though I'm not fretting out, they are definitely lower than I would like them to be. Almost impossibly, I don't know if you're going to be able to see this, but almost impossibly low, which is a testament to their fretwork here, which I'm going to touch on in just a second. But yeah, I am quite literally, I feel like I'm seeing less than a millimeter between the high E string and the top of the 12th fret, and even up here in the higher frets here, up at the 21st and 22nd frets, I'm still not seeing even a millimeter, and I'm not fretting out, which is bonkers. Yeah, I'm not fretting out. Maybe fretting, no, I'm still clearing, which is nuts. So, wow. So yeah, so maybe, so long as I can get on with the action being that low, that is totally cool. That's awesome. Wow. And like the FJM7 Ultra, my goodness, what FOALS is able to accomplish here on a guitar that is right around that $600 mark is nutty. Just plain nutty. The fretwork here is just immaculate. Immaculate. And this was in transit for the past month. So I don't know if they're doing something to treat these necks and these fretboards so that they don't get fret sprout. If we look a little bit closer here, you can see that they are dressed to a very, very fine degree here. Okay. They're not semi-hemispherical style fret ends like I've seen on some of those other, another brand that I've seen folks raving about is those Tees guitars, which are also coming out of China. But they have got a nice, really kind of, you can see that the bevel for these frets comes in quite a bit, but still clears, you know, your strings here are not in danger of slipping off despite them coming in quite a bit more than they typically do on a Fender or a Squier because of the 52.5 millimeter string spacing on the FOALS F3 bridge here. That is amazing. Amazing. Also, another detail that I'm seeing here is, unlike the FJM7 Ultra, there is no overhang on this neck here. So if for whatever reason you wanted to swap this out for another neck, I'm assuming that you could, aside from the fact that this does not have the standard, you know, 4-screw neck plate kind of setup here. It does have that little contour at the back, a modern kind of detail to help players access the upper registers a bit better, which, again, some folks are really going to like that. For me personally, I don't need that. I don't really live up here when I play, but a nice detail nonetheless. Okay. All right. So yeah, wow. This is craziness. This is craziness. And the vibrato right from the jump here is also feeling pretty good. Now that I have unlocked the trem lock here, the height of the vibrato arm is actually not that bad. I am not feeling like I really need to. Maybe I want to bend that a little bit more, but no, that actually feels really good to me. Whether that's actually set up properly to float, we're going to find out once this thing hits the bench. But that feels really nice. All right, so let's go ahead and plug this bad boy in and see what it sounds like. All right, so we are plugged in now, and I just wanted to show you very quickly before we do anything else here. This is the standby noise that we're getting. It almost, I don't hear any 60 cycle hum at all. I'm not touching any of the metal. We're on our bridge pickup. I can't even see the audio coming from the meter at all, which is insanity. All right, and just to show you that it's on. So that is bonkers, okay? There's both of our pickups on. And again, I don't see anything on the meter registering, no standby noise at all. And my volume and tone are all the way up here. All right, and here's our neck pickup. It's very slight. I'm not going to say that they are noiseless, but it's very slight. That's craziness. All right, and then now our rhythm circuit. Wow. All right, so we're just going to do just a very quick sound test at first here before we do our more in-depth sound demos later on. But let's just see what this thing feels like. All right, starting off with our bridge pickup. Both pickups in parallel. Neck pickup by itself. Wow, yeah, I am just first impressions wise, they sound like good Jaguar pickups should. I am very curious to find out what kind of pots we've got in here, whether these are 250K pots or whether they are 1 meg pots, because they sound really sweet and not ice picky to me at all. Just really nice and full, kind of sweet sound. I don't want to say creamy. I hate using that adjective. It sounds like maybe it has a bit more mids than your typical Jaguar pickups do, which is nice, but they don't sound like they are like hot wound pickups. So I'm going to be curious to find out what the outputs of these pickups actually are. My goodness. As far as out of the box goes, I am just going to say this. before this even hits the bench, that I have not ever really played a Fender or a Squier that has played this good out of the box, except for maybe Fender Japan. And even some of those Fender Japan, the traditional 60s ones that come with those original threaded saddle bridges, they do still need a bit of tweaking. But the fact that the action is as low as it is, and we can even just check to see what action we're getting. We're going to be using our Fret Guru XT as always here. And at the 12th fret here, I am definitely well under 2 millimeters. This is at about 1.6 millimeters at the 12th fret here. And then at the high E, my goodness, this is like not even 1. It's at like 0.5 somehow. Is like at maybe like I'd say 0.8 millimeters at the 12th fret on the treble string. So yeah, I'm not fretting out somehow, which is miraculous. Anyway, amazing first impressions. I feel like I'm even more impressed by this than I was with the FJM7 Ultra, which I did not think was going to be possible here. Let's go ahead and throw this thing on the bench and just see what we end up finding under the hood. We're going to then finally pull off all of the plastics and things that are still on here, because undoubtedly I can already tell this is going to be a keeper. So let's go ahead and switch on over to the bench cam. So we are back from the bench, and in fact, I've actually now had this for a couple of days. And so to save on time, rather than doing the play-by-play discovery of everything I ended up finding, I'm just going to recap and show you what I found. So one of the first things that I ended up finding is the fact that this actually came with an F4 bridge. I reached out to FOALS to ask them what the deal was with that. Are all of the FJG7s now coming stock with the F4? And they responded that no, they are still coming with the F3, but if you were going to be ordering one and you would prefer the F4, they are happy to swap an F4 in for you. So that is very, very nice to hear. The next thing that I found as soon as I popped the vibrato off was the fact that the ground wire going from the lead circuit here was again very, very excessive. This time, thankfully, unlike the FJM7 Ultra, that long cloth covered Gavit wiring was not catching on the plate or anything below. In fact, it was so long that it like was lining the bottom of the vibrato cavity itself. I ended up unhooking that and just doing it the same way that Fender usually does it, with just the exposed wire coming out the top edge of the vibrato cavity and then sandwiched underneath the vibrato unit itself. So as expected, once we finally got the pick guard and all of the control plates off, we discovered that this does have copper foil shielding. It was very, very meticulously done. Now that said, be very, very careful, because one of the biggest pains for having cavities that are completely lined with copper foil or brass tubs or whatever it may be is that if you're not careful, something like the edge or a terminal from one of the pots or the input jack or something can make contact with the walls that are copper foil lined and is effectively going to shunt your signal to ground, giving you no output. And that very thing happened to me when I was putting this back together. So just a heads up for you on that front. In addition to that, we found, like the FJM7 Ultra, that the wiring harness here is all cloth covered 22 gauge Gavit cloth cover wiring. It might not actually be the Gavit brand, but something equivalent. It's nice. It's neat overall for the most part. But unlike the FJM7 Ultra, this does not have CTS pots for your lead circuit down here. Instead, it has full-size 250K alpha pots for both your volume and tone control. and then surprisingly has a 0.03 UF capacitor in that lead circuit. Now that definitely is going to make for a darker tone than typical of a Jaguar, but for me, when listening through my Princeton Reverb amp, there's still plenty of brightness coming through. But if you want it to sound more vintage accurate, more Jaguar-y, you want more of that top end sparkle and high end, undoubtedly switching to 1 meg pots here is going to result in that iconic Jaguar tone. Now, unlike the lead circuit, the rhythm circuit here is vintage spec with your 1 meg pot for the volume and your 50K pot for the tone pot, and then you've got the vintage accurate 0.01 UF capacitor between those. All of the switches in here is all import spec electronics. They're decent, they're nothing to write home about, but they definitely are functional, and I have had no problems with any of that at all. Now, moving on to the pickups in this thing, they definitely are high quality pickups. You can tell they have fiberboard bobbins instead of plastic like you will find on a Squier. They definitely have been wax potted, and they have this nice red color to them, which is very unique for a Jaguar pickup. The coil wire itself is actually encased in a cloth wrap, so that protects you from potentially, if you're swapping out covers or anything like that, protects the coil from being broken on that front, which is nice to see. Now, lastly, on the pickups, when measuring their output, these undoubtedly are vintage spec Jaguar pickups. We've got 6.3K for the bridge pickup and a little underwound on the neck with 5.9K. Despite the fact that they do sound a bit darker due to those 250K pots, I really dig the tone of these pickups. Now, a couple of notes about the stock setup on this was the fact that the truss rod relief that this came with was almost perfect from the factory. In fact, coming in a little under Fender's recommended spec of 10 thousandths of an inch when you are measuring from the top of the 8th fret to the bottom of your low and high E strings. I was able to adjust that to be closer to what I prefer, about 6 thousandths of an inch, and still getting overall fairly nice buzz-free action throughout the fretboard. I did end up making adjustments to the bridge, especially because the radius was very, very close to being spot on, but just needed the low and high E side of the saddles here to be raised just a bit for a perfect 9.5-inch radius. And likely those dropped during its travel here from China because unfortunately, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in a second, unfortunately, the tolerances for the set screws in this bridge are not that great. After setting it up to what's comfortable to me and still considered by most folks to be low action, I ended up with 1.85 millimeters from the top of the 12th fret to the bottom of the low E string, and 1.5 millimeters from the top of the 12th fret to the bottom of the high E string. Now, because the spec sheet just lists these frets as 2.5 millimeters, which is a medium-sized fret, I did break the calipers out, and I found that the frets overall are between 40 thousandths of an inch and about 45 thousandths of an inch at their tallest. So that definitely puts it in about, between vintage size and vintage tall territory. Definitely not as tall as a narrow tall, which is usually about 55 thousandths of an inch and up. And then as far as their thickness or their width, these came in at 92 thousandths of an inch. So yeah, I would say they are just about as wide as like a vintage tall or a narrow tall, and not as narrow as an actual vintage size fret. Overall, they are very comfortable to me, and yeah, these just are super nice and easy to play. Now, despite overall being incredibly impressed with this guitar, I did find some areas for improvement, especially after giving this a couple of days, being able to put in time with it and really finding more details and the ins and outs of this guitar overall. And so the very first thing that I discovered when under the hood that was kind of a disappointment was the fact that the input jack as well as the pots were missing a toothed washer. And the reason why you want one of these toothed washers, honestly, is because when you are tightening these pots or the input jack, you want the teeth of this to grab against your pick guard or the control plate here. And that was not happening. So when I was tightening them, they would just continue to kind of spin, despite the fact that they have another nut underneath, but that was not doing anything to prevent them from kind of continuing to move. And then they would come loose over time. So if you want to solve that issue, finding toothed washers specifically for pots is definitely very easy and relatively inexpensive. Just go on to Amazon and you will find them right away. The ones that I'm using here are M10 size internal tooth washers. Because I do a lot of guitar work, I decided to buy these in bulk and ended up getting 100 of them for less than 10 bucks. And these always come in handy when you're doing guitar work. So yeah, but otherwise, you know, expect to spend at least $5 to get a couple of these, and that will fix that problem right away. Now, while the body of this is meticulously shielded, I was surprised to find that the pickguard itself had no shielding whatsoever. When you do not have a shield on the back of a Jaguar pickguard, you sometimes will get crackles and static when your finger rubs against the pickguard. It wasn't happening too much, but would happen just very, very intermittently. So no doubt I will be going back in here and shielding the back of this pickguard to solve that issue. Continuing on the topic of pickguards, I know a lot of folks out there will want to know what spec pickguard will you need to swap the stock pickguard out if you don't end up liking the stock pickguard that comes on yours. And I found that unfortunately some US spec, like a Music Lily pickguard, which are cheap but decent quality ones that you can find on Amazon, those are supposedly US spec, did not fit here. The thimbles did not line up for that to be able to fit, nor did a Squier pickguard, which is also typically compatible with a US spec Jaguar body. That didn't fit either. Weirdly, an all parts US spec pickguard fit on this thing just fine. I tried out a mint green guard from All Parts, and that fit just about perfectly. Some of the screws maybe closer here to the control panel might have to go in a little bit at a diagonal or so, unless you want to fill and re-drill. And also there are some folks who have reported on offsetguitars.com that pickguards, US spec pickguards from EY guitars are also a perfect fit on this. You might just actually have to slightly loosen the control plates to get that to fit and line up. So that definitely is another place where I wish that FOALS just used like an industry standard spec for most of the pickguards that you can find out there to be compatible, because that was definitely also a pain point with the FOALS FJM7 Ultra. So moving on to some areas of improvement for the hardware. Now, this is something that I had heard from my friend, the Volume Control, who's a forum member over at offsetguitars.com and also runs the VC Tone Shop. He had reported to me that when he got his FOALS FJG7, that he couldn't, with the stock strings, set the vibrato to float. And what that basically means is calibrating the tremolock so that there is no change between locked and unlocked with your tuning. This is the way that Che Choi at Lounging Guitars teaches folks how to calibrate the vibrato, and I found that to be the same exact thing on this one. And now the reason why that was happening is because with the 10 to 46 gauge strings that came stock on this, the spring that comes in the FOALS vibrato here is unfortunately just a bit too long, has a bit too much tension, and also the screw that comes with it is also too long. So when you are actually trying to calibrate, the screw ends up coming out of the vibrato, sitting proud of it, and the little nut at the bottom is about to drop off before you can even get to the point where the trem lock is calibrated properly. Now, to test that it was indeed a spring and screw issue, I did try out that vintage Jazzmaster spring that I have, along with just a generic aftermarket screw and nut for a Jazzmaster or Jaguar vibrato spring, and I was able to perfectly set the trem lock when those were installed. But for today's demo, because I wanted pretty much everything here to be stock, I did revert it back. Now, mind you, your Mastery vibrato or your Howland vibrato, your Descendant, a lot of the premium aftermarket vibratos that are out there don't have a trem lock at all. So in actual use for a stable and well-working vibrato, it really didn't make any difference at all. It just comes down to whether or not you are intending to use that trem lock for its original intended design, which is so that if you break a string, whether it be during a performance or in a studio or whatever it is, if that trem lock is calibrated properly and your vibrato is set to float, so to speak, then when you engage the trem lock, that will bring the rest of your strings, which have now gone sharp after breaking a string, back down to pitch. What I would recommend that you folks do if you get one of these, basically unscrew it to the point where that screw starts to sit proud of the vibrato plate here, and then just tighten it back down very minimally until that is recessed and touching the plate once more. And that is the closest that you're going to get if you want to use the stock or 10 to 46 or even lighter gauge strings with this vibrato unit. Now, the volume control also reported to me, and I haven't tried this out yet myself, that installing 11s or strings that are a higher gauge does solve that issue, and you can set it up to float then. So yeah, I think it really comes down to the fact that the stock spring is just a little bit too tall and has a little bit too much tension and requires more string tension to be set properly. As I mentioned before, the tolerances for the set screws on this bridge are not great, and so when I was playing it, even after setting the radius, the A side of this first bass side saddle sank down and continued to sink down despite readjusting. I could feel all of these set screws overall did not have really great resistance when adjusting those. And so I ended up putting Loctite 222, the purple variant, on all these set screws for this bridge, and just definitely made it that much more stable. Again, that is not unique to FOALS in this instance. You will find that on pretty much every bridge, especially your Fenders and Squiers, and less likely to find them on your premium aftermarket bridges like your Mastery bridges. But even some of those, over time, with a lot of use and wear, will ultimately start to kind of loosen themselves a bit and will require a little bit of Loctite to keep them where you want them. So so yeah, that definitely is one thing to take note of when you get yours. Again, it was only the A saddle, but because the other ones felt so loose in this case, I just felt like if I'm going to do that one, I might as well do all of them. The other quirk, which I believe I mentioned with the FOALS FJM7 Ultra that I found, is when you are trying to lower your bridge, it doesn't actually lower, and the set screw for the bridge height, the overall bridge height, it just recesses into the post. And the reason why that happens is because the tolerance on this, in this case, with the thimbles is very, very tight. In fact, it took me a bit of effort to be able to even get the bridge out at all. And so that tells you that there's absolutely no room or no play whatsoever between the bridge post and the thimbles, which is a good thing. But the downside of that is that if you do want to adjust your bridge to be lower from being at a higher setting, you do need to unlock the little rivets or grommets or whatever that keep the bridge posts fixed to the base here. Unlock them fully, and then you need to physically push down on the bridge for it to reach, the point where you have set those set screws. So I find that to be quite a bit annoying. I have experienced it on pretty much every FOALS F3 and F4 bridge, and you can't really, especially if you haven't applied Loctite yet, you can't really feel any resistance at all. So it takes a bit of back and forth to get the right setting and height. So I just wanted you to be aware of that with these bridges in particular. Now, moving on to the nut, I did find that the nut on this thing is cut really well overall. Some of these slots, primarily the low E, was a bit shallow at 33 thousandths of an inch between the top of the first fret and the bottom of that low E string. The other ones were within range, maybe a tiny bit shallow. The treble strings on this were right within range of what I typically go for, which is anywhere between 15 and 18 thousandths. I was finding that these ones here were between 18 and 20 thousandths. So if you wanted them to be more consistent and follow the radius of the neck, it will require some minimal nut work from your tech or yourself if you have nut files. The only one that was kind of excessively shallow is the low E, so I likely am going to address that in the very near future. Now, two other things that I wanted to mention between this and the FOALS FJM7 Ultra, and that you experience on pretty much every vibrato unit that uses a set screw to keep the arm as tight and in place how you want it to. The little head of this this vibrato arm end, despite the fact that there is a ball end to the set screw, it still will come loose over time. So I find that that using a little nylon disc, like what I've done to mod most of the modern dynamic vibrato that come in here, a little nylon disc that's sandwiched between that set screw and the end of this arm goes a long way in keeping a nice, fluid and smooth feel without too much resistance, and just keeps it in place. I did that to my FOALS FJM7 Ultra not that long ago, and that one has been hanging tight very, very well. And so most likely I'm going to do that to this. The other thing is that applying a bit of lubrication to the end of this will help solve any kind of resistance or scratchiness that you might feel. I was getting a tiny bit of that on this, especially when I would end up pulling up, kind of up here. Not something that I usually do, but I could feel it when I would move. So I just dipped the end of the arm in some Vaseline and popped it back in, and now it feels nice and fluid. I did end up bending the arm a bit upwards because I wanted a bit more leverage, and you can see the arm is starting to get a little bit loose because I didn't tighten it while I was under the hood here. That most likely would solve it temporarily. But again, the nylon disc mod would be a more permanent and lasting solution. The other thing that was kind of funny to me was the only plastic on here that didn't match the overall black on black aesthetic of this guitar was the tremolo arm tip, which was white while all the other plastics were black. So I ended up putting a 5mm spec push-on tip onto the top of this to match. Two final areas for improvement that I found on this. Now, I didn't experience it too much with the tuners that came on the FJM7 Ultra. These look like they are the same exact tuners as the ones that came stock on these FOALS vintage style locking tuners. But on this one here, I was experiencing some intermittent slippage when tuning. I do not know if that comes down to the strings or how these were strung. I didn't fix anything on that end. Nothing looks glaringly obvious with regards to it being strung improperly here. So just something for you to note. It did improve somewhat after tightening the locking mechanism on the backs of these, but I still am getting it very minimally. Again, these are still these still feel better to me than your the Squier classic vibe tuners, and even some of the older made in Mexico ping tuners that a lot of the Fender offsets came with. But no doubt a set of Gotos usually feels better than these, and it's definitely not because we're getting any binding at the nut, because I did verify that these strings are not binding in any of those slots at all. Now, the one final thing before we do our sound demo that I did want to bring your attention to, and that is the fact that I am not a fan of these cheaper, smaller kind of import spec knobs, the fluted knobs that US and even Squier Jaguars come with. Are a bit bigger, they just look better, and they use a set screw to stay on, while these are push-on type. Not something that's gonna bug most folks, I don't think, but because I am absolutely insane when it comes to these offset guitar details, I am undoubtedly going to be swapping those out for full-size US spec Jaguar knobs very shortly. I did just want to very quickly clarify that this is not their standard Dream Bubble or Dream Foam case. It turns out that this is one of the Ghostfire Phantom series cases that they've done in collaboration with FOALS. This is a case that they do sell separately. It is fully water resistant, unlike the Dream Bubble or Dream Foam series that the majority of the FOALS guitars come with stock. I am not sure, and haven't yet gotten a response from FOALS, whether if you order one from here are going to be getting one of these cases. I believe that these are about $137, which is only $2 more expensive than the stock cases that they also sell. I really like this case a bit more than that, because I like that it doesn't have all of the kind of obnoxious branding all over, just a nice tasteful little fold here. It does have more pockets, 2 additional pockets than what the Dream Foam cases come with. The interiors are very similar. But I like the fact that this is water resistant. So if you have to be out in the rain with your gig bag, this is an excellent case to have your Jaguar, your Jazzmaster in. All right, final things that I haven't yet mentioned about the setup. I did stretch the strings, which I do on the setups of all of the guitars that I work on here. I did also add lubrication to both the nut slots as well as the saddle slots, because despite the fact that this here is inspired by the Mastery bridge in some ways, it doesn't have that same plating that makes lubricating these slots on a Mastery bridge most times unnecessary. So because this is a raw brass, I did end up adding lubrication there too, because I just want to, in the setup, want to facilitate as best I can these strings passing over both of those points as smoothly and easily as possible. I did also have to lower these pickups down during the setup, because I found that I was having some issues with intonation, and that was a result of the pickups just being too high. The magnets were too close to the strings and literally pulling on them. And so when I lowered them a bit to the point where they are no longer oscillating, that fixed my intonation issue. So if you end up having similar issues, if you get one of these, or really any other Jaguar, that is definitely one of the first things that I would recommend you try, is just lowering the pickups. And one other thing that I did want to check is to see how much this thing actually weighs, because I am under the impression that it is a bit lighter than your standard US or even the Squier or made in Mexico Jaguars. So I'm just going to pop this on the luggage scale here. All right, so I am getting 8 pounds even. Let's just try that one more time, so that in case we're getting a false read. So that time it said 8.1. One more time, 8 pounds again. So yeah, I was spot on. I feel like I know my weights by now, but yeah, it's 8 pounds. I'd say somewhere between 8 and 8.1 pounds, which is as far as Jaguars go, pretty damn light. All right, so we are plugged in now to the Princeton Reverb Reissue. We are set to a volume of about 6.7, 6.8, just on the edge of breakup, and that's the setting that we're going to leave it on for the remainder of the demos today. We are starting off with the bridge pickup with the volume and tone controls at 10. Both pickups together in parallel. Neck pickup by itself. All right, rhythm circuit. All right, and now we're going to do it with the strangle switch, starting with the bridge pickup again. Both pickups together in parallel. Now the neck pickup with the strangle. All right, bridge pickup by itself. All right, now both pickups together in parallel. All right, now the neck pickup. All right, and lastly, our rhythm circuit. All right, so there it is, the FOALS FJG7, and overall, I am super impressed with this Jaguar. As many of you folks know, I own an American vintage reissue Jaguar, a Johnny Marr Jaguar, an actual vintage 1965 Jaguar Squiers, and I have worked on hundreds of Jags at this point, and not even just for the price, which $625, $600, some even less depending on the color that you get of these FOALS FJG7s, and they really knocked it out of the park. Yes, undoubtedly, like the things that I mentioned, there are a couple of things here that do have room for improvement, but the total package that you are getting here, and requiring just minimal work to get set up properly, is insane to me. Just absolutely insane. And I already started to think about the next video that I do want to make with this, where maybe we do upgrade a couple of the components that are maybe lacking. Something like, I'm curious about what 1 meg pots with these pickups sound like, because it sounds good to me overall, but I am missing some of that brightness and top end that I typically get from vintage spec Jaguar pickups. But overall, as far as being functional, as far as being stable, everything here, I really don't find a need to actually upgrade much of anything here. If anything, if I do make a video like that, it's really going to be out of curiosity to see how much better we can make it from stock. But as a full package, again, I challenge folks to find me a better Jaguar that has premium hardware that feels and is as good as what FOALS included on this guitar for under $1,000. Hell, I'll even put that up and say under $1,500. This competes especially for this combo of vintage meets modern Jaguar with the American Pro Classic, which honestly, I had a couple more gripes with than this guitar here. Not to mention that a number of those that I've gotten in for work are missing ground wires to the hardware altogether, that the shielding is insufficient, that the pickups in those are even darker than the pickups here with 250K pots. I think this is a crazy alternative to the much more expensive American Pro Classic Jaguar. If I were to pit both of these against one another, no doubt this FOALS F4 bridge is way better. This vibrato is way better. The shielding in this guitar is way more sufficient, right? The actual rosewood that is on here, and also the fit and finish to the fretwork, the fret ends is nutty compared to that guitar. That guitar doesn't even come with a bone nut, right? So yeah, the value for your money here, if you are in the market for a Jaguar, I would just go ahead and say, skip the Squier altogether. If you're going to be buying a Squier new, which is already over $500, I feel like, after taxes in most places. In some instances, again, depending on the color that you choose, for less than $100 more, you get all of this. You get the insane quality gig bag. You get all of those little extras. And yeah, the FOALS FJM7 Ultra, which I've had now since the beginning of like when the Vintera 3s launched, that is still showcasing no fret sprout, still no frets that have become unseated over time. It just plays like a friggin' champ, which I really cannot say at minimum for those made in Mexico Fenders that have been coming out over the past couple of years. Give those not even a month and already the ends start to sprout in a really, really sharp and uncomfortable way. I've even had clients like buy those new, and already within 2 weeks or so, they need at minimum a fret end dressing, which is not something I've had to deal with here. So yeah, while there were a couple of minor areas for this guitar to be a bit better already in stock form, it's nutty for the price especially. So there it is. Do I recommend this? Undoubtedly, wholeheartedly. If you are interested in picking up one of these, I have left a discount code down below. It knocks an additional 5% off of your purchase, which is not a ton, but it will help a little bit. It did take me a bit over a month to get this. This shipped out from FOALS on June 3rd. and I just got it a couple of days ago. So yeah, it took a little over a month, but it's definitely well worth the wait. And yeah, I just have nothing but really overall overwhelming praise for this guitar and for what the folks over at FOALS are doing. So anyway, that is going to do it for this video. I hope you found it enjoyable as well as informative, especially if you've had your eyes on this FOALS FJG7. Definitely let me know down in the comments if you've already got one of these and what you think about it. Did you run into some of the same issues that I ran into here? Do you love the same things that I love, that I shared with you all in this review? I know that it's going to be helpful not only to me, because I love reading those comments, but to anybody else out there who may be interested in picking up one of these. If you haven't already, please hit that like and subscribe button as well as the notification bell to be notified of new videos as soon as they drop. And don't forget to follow Totally Wired Guitars for more offset guitars buying tips.